This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio brings you relevant and detailed discussions and interviews on software engineering topics every 2 weeks. Thanks to our audience and the partners listed on our website for supporting the podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Software Engineering Radio. In this episode, we're going to talk about working as a consultant or coach. We'll define what the difference is in software. We had announced this episode a long time ago, probably during the episode that Michael Kircher and I did about his role as a team lead at Siemens. I think he never mentioned Siemens, but I guess everybody knows that he works for Siemens anyway. So today we're going to talk about another role, which is the consultant, and on the other end of on the other side of the car in which we record this, Martin. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Markus.
We didn't decide who will be the person to ask questions and who will be the content provider. So we're going to do this in a relatively unprepared / flexible way. Okay, so I guess when we talk about consulting and coaching, I guess we should first define what this is, right? And
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, do you want to give it a shot?
To be honest, I have no real clearly defined clue what the real difference between consulting and coaching is. I think mostly because of in my work I often act as a coach, but the contract is maybe with the client is more on this kind of consulting stuff.
So what do you do when you act as a coach? Maybe that's a way to get a grip on it.
Yeah, I think typically in projects where I'm involved, I help teams to learn something, to get something done, which they haven't maybe done before. For example, they learn to do Scrum as an agile process, and I help them to do Scrum. So I'm not really doing Scrum for them, but I'm helping them to do Scrum. So maybe that's the difference because of as a consultant, you typically often do something you get something done for the client. You implement some stuff, or you do some software and deliver the software or whatever. You solve a problem for them, and as a coach, you more or less help them to get this stuff done for themselves.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of differentiating it. The way I typically do it is that if I have a project that goes on for weeks or months, then I usually call it coaching, because I do what you just said. I help the team to actually work, right? And consulting is what I call if I go to a team for, 2 or 3 days and just help them, get aligned into a certain direction. Giving them a training on Xtext, or trying to find the first iteration for building a DSL for, refrigerator configuration.
Yeah.
So for me, the short-term stuff where I basically only talk and maybe build a prototype, that's what I call consulting. And when I do something for a longer time and I'm like a real member of the team and do actual work, or help them do something over the long term, that's what I call coaching. But I guess it's clear that the definition isn't really sharp.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Especially in the day-to-day work, right?
Yes. I mean, I think it's important for us to differentiate the kind of consulting / coaching that we talk about from maybe the classical, business guy, who comes in with a suit, which is important in that case. And
because we don't wear a suit.
Yes.
And we don't like it very much.
And so we really talk about hands-on software work when we talk about consulting, not about the classical business stuff.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Same for me.
Yeah. So I guess one primary goal of consulting and coaching is knowledge transfer. So you want to help the team learn something or get good at something, or right?
Yeah, I think that's a big differentiation between doing consulting or coaching and some pure body leasing or doing some just coding because the team has not enough coding hands-on developers or so.
Yeah. So okay. So I think what we want to do is we want to tell you a little bit how we work, what we do as consultants or coaches, and then we can discuss a little bit what we think the necessary competencies of people who do this job are or should be. Danger is always that it sounds like we're, telling you how great we are. That's not the idea. But since this episode, actually, recently we got an email, I forgot who sent it, who reminded us that we still should do this episode. So that's why we got together and actually did it.
Yeah.
So some people actually want to hear this. Okay, so why don't you tell us about one or two typical projects and then what you do on a day-to-day basis?
So one typical project for me is to get involved with a team who wants to adopt, for example, agile methods, for example, Scrum, and they really would like to get a feeling, what does it mean to adopt Scrum? What does it mean for them to adopt Scrum? So they invite me, and we talk for maybe 2 or 3 days about what is Scrum, how is Scrum defined, and especially what does it mean for them to do Scrum. So this kind of transferring the theoretical knowledge into their practical daily life, so that they get a feeling, what does it mean? How could they start? How could they move on adopting agile stuff? And this is typically done in a more workshop-like style, where you sit together without tables and a flip chart and a pinboard, and you interactively discuss things with a group. More or less, yeah. I think mostly with the group. I think.
Who is that group? What kind of people are these?
I think it's very widespread. Developers, project leaders, sometimes even pure managers. I think it's very widespread across all the typical roles from software development inside companies. So typically they're so my clients are more larger companies with old or hierarchical structures in it, and they ask for help. And these 2-day workshop style jobs, they are more this kind of you haven't prepared a fixed agenda, or you haven't prepared 200 slides and talk to them all the time. You more or less interactively discuss with the people, what does it mean, what are the questions. So what I really like to do is start with a list of questions.
You mean your
content.
Customers provide you with questions?
They provide me with questions, or we start with the workshop with let's collect some questions. What are your questions? What are the most important things you have in mind? The biggest questions, and we prioritize the questions. So the list of questions, and then we go through all those questions step by step in the list of the prioritization, and discuss those questions more or less. And while discussing those questions, I integrate some theoretical knowledge,
right,
where I know, now I should talk about how to do retrospectives, or how to do daily iteration or daily sprint planning or stuff like that. But it's more on demand, the theoretical slices that are integrated. I think that's a typical job for this kind of small sized 2-3 days jobs. I think, yeah.
So in my case, there are two very typical different cases. One is that the consulting activity is based on a specific tool, Eclipse modeling, Xtext, things like that. And the workshop is more or less built like a training where the customer tells me, we want to build this kind of language, and we know that Xtext is great or something. And then we basically start building this together. I help them build the language and teach them the tool. That's one very typical way. Another, for me, much more interesting way is, or kind of job is, if the customer says, we've heard about this model-driven DSL, domain-specific language stuff, and we think it sounds great. And now we want to see whether we can use it in our environment.
Yeah.
And we would like, for example, and then there are two cases. Either they say, we have a specific case in mind. For example, recently I worked with a company who actually builds refrigerators, and they thought about defining a domain-specific language for helping their thermodynamicists define the cooling algorithm for refrigerators, which is not as trivial as you might think. And so what we do then is we spend 2 days and try to get a first iteration about this language. And so what I do there is that first of all, I have to understand what their problem is. So I ask a lot of questions. I try to understand what it means to describe how a refrigerator is cooled, right? So I have to understand what they want to describe. And then usually we sit down with a notebook and we actually start prototyping a language, because in the end I have to somehow, assuming I'm convinced that a DSL is the right approach, then I have to convince them that this would work and that the effort for building a language is acceptable. So that's why we spend usually a day or two actually building a sample or example or first iteration of a language. And so these are the two classical consulting gigs.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the customer wants me, they've seen my name, conference stuff, we'll talk about that later. And so they sometimes say, while you're already here, why don't you give, 1 hour, 30 minutes presentation to the whole team or to all the developers in the company and tell them about DSLs. This is more like a little bit of propaganda for the department then. So that's the typical, I guess, consulting cases in my case.
Yeah, I think for me, the other case, aside of these 2 to 3 day workshops, is the classical introducing Scrum to a team for a long period of time. So coaching them for several months, for 1, 2, 3 days a week or so, and doing Scrum or another agile method, whatever, in their day-to-day job, and helping them to get this the thing successful.
So you would come back every week for a day or two?
Yeah, for example, typically a little bit more intense at the beginning. So we start with 2, 3, 4 days a week or so. And then after some weeks, we reduce it to 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 1 day a month, and so on. So the better it gets on site, the less frequently I visit them.
Yeah, this is what I do as well, and that's what I would call coaching then, just a differentiator, although it probably it's not very interesting. And there I do exactly the same thing, except that I usually don't deal with processes, but rather with technologies and certain practices. But it would work the same way. I would start with more intensity and then reducing it over time.
I'm also asked for some technical stuff, but that's more or less because I'm split into two halves.
Yes.
One of my interest is these process stuff and agile stuff, and the other part of my heart beats for cool technology stuff and JavaScript and OSGI technologies. And that's a lot of fun to get involved with teams which are adopting, for example, OSGI and figure out some technical challenging problems they have. Some class loading issues or so. The typical, from my point of view, very, very interesting problems you run into if you use OSGI, for example. And it's a lot of fun to work with them on those problems, getting the thing to work, mostly in a short period of time. So I'm just there for 1 or 2 days or so, and they hope to get this problem solved in that period of time. And it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Intensive work, but very, very interesting. You see a lot of different systems, a lot of different people, and it's always fun.
I guess we should come back to what we like and what we don't like about our consulting jobs towards the end. But seeing different systems and different teams working with these systems is certainly a big plus. What do you think being a consultant is, what's important to be a good consultant? I mean, you already said that you're like split between process stuff and some technologies, certain specific technologies, basically OSGI mostly, right? That's what you're known for.
Yeah.
What would you think is an important precondition to be a good consultant?
I think for me, one of the most important preconditions is that you like to listen to people. And
that's interesting. I thought consultants talk all the time.
maybe I also like to talk, but I think it's very important to listen to people and to understand their problems and to be very respectful to their systems and to their problems and to their teams, because I think sometimes I met consultants. They come into a project and they are the big bosses.
Hero.
And they know everything. They're big heroes, and all the clients is just hey, what are you doing here? I know it better, and the architecture is completely wrong. You should do it this or that way. And I think that's not my style of doing consultancy. And I think it's not, from my personal point of view, it's not the thing that I like.
But it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because on the one hand side, in your example, let's take OSGI as an example. People know that you know about OSGI quite a lot, so they might hire you to help them with their OSGI problems. So you have to, in some sense, know some things better than they do, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't hire you.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can't go in and say, you're all idiots and this is all wrong, let's do it differently. I mean, you can do it, but you probably won't be very well liked with the team.
Yeah, but even if I wouldn't care about if they like me or not, it's typically not. It's not true.
So the trick is that you bring in your knowledge about the technologies or whatever they hired you for, but you don't press it on them.
I don't press it on them. I think acting as a consultant or coach inside a team, of course they hire you because maybe they have not enough knowledge in a specific technology or a specific process stuff, or they need some help in some part of their doing, but they're not idiots. They are
Right.
Typically, I met a lot of very, very good teams,
Yes.
great teams and great people,
Yes.
and they do great work. And I think the beneficial part of this consulting job is that you put together these two sides. So I know a little bit more about OSGI than they do maybe, and they know a lot more about their domain, their system, their structure, their site conditions, all this huge amount of stuff that they have to deal with in their day-to-day work, which I'm just not aware of.
Yeah.
And I think you have to bring together these two points, these two big areas of knowledge, to get something done and something solved.
Maybe in trying to express the same thing in a different way is what I always do is that if I have a dedicated opinion on something, I let them know. And I tell them if I think they do something wrong. However, I also know where my boundaries are. I don't try to be, the all-knowing God about everything, right? I just in a very specific area, I help them, and I probably really do know more about certain things, as you just said, and I stay away from the other stuff. And I also tell them if they want something from me for which I don't know what I should say, I just say, no, I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Just leave me alone.
And I think it's perfectly okay to say my opinion is this or that, and maybe it's not shared with other people in the world. That's fine, but it's still maybe just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the truth, or the truth of the world. It's maybe just my opinion or my personal experiences drawn from whatever I did in the past, which may be completely different from what they do. So I think it's for me it's more like sharing my experiences, and trying to adapt my experiences to their situations, and trying to find out together with the team what we can learn from those experiences, maybe to get something solved or something better, whatever.
One thing I also noticed in my work is that I sometimes tend to not spend enough energy to really understand deeply what the customer's problem really is. Sometimes you go somewhere, you talk to people half an hour, and then you tend to put the the problem they have into one of your boxes. There's a box for these kinds of things and the box for those kinds of things. And then you already want to start solving it, but you didn't really understand things. And then, you start doing things, you help them build a prototype, whatever. And then over the day, you notice, oh, I was way too optimistic. It's much more complicated. The problem is much deeper. It's not so easy. So as you say, it's really important to spend some time and listen to people and really try to understand their input.
Yeah, it's in one of my projects I was involved in. I worked for a relatively long time with the team, developing inside the team, doing architecture discussions, design discussions, but also just day-to-day programming. And sometimes they ask me do you have a design idea for this problem? And they mostly said, you have to ask them 3 times until you get a really good answer. Because my first answer was just like these, oh, yeah, I know this is similar to that. And the solution is A. And after 2 hours, they came back and say, I ran into this problem. Can you take a look at this? And say, oh, yes, my answer A was wrong.
Yeah,
it's
simplistic.
It was completely shit.
Yeah.
Let's try B.
Yeah.
I have an idea for B. And then after 3 hours, they come back and say, can you again take a look at this? I think it does not really match here.
Yeah.
And then together, we find a solution C. But then again, it's this situation of sharing experiences, discussing things with them. It's not about knowing something better or knowing more or less than someone else. It's more like having different experiences than other people and sharing those experiences with other people to see what we can learn from them and what solution we can find.
Some people say that a consultant shouldn't bring in any knowledge. He should only help the team discover what they already know and bring things together, help facilitate a creative or productive team. I would say that's not the kind of consulting I do, right? I'm not saying that's wrong or that's not happening, but that's not the kind of consulting I do. I'm hired for very specific areas of expertise. So my role is not the person who gels a team, as you would want to say. But those people also exist, I guess.
Yeah, I think from my process consulting, it's more that style. Yeah. Because it doesn't help the team then if I do the process. If I live the process,
makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
Yes.
The team has to live the process and has to accept it and modify it and has to learn how to deal with this process and has to they have to make their own experiences using this process. And that's very much the situation where I help the team to figure out what is right and what is wrong. And I don't know in advance what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah. So one thing that I think that is important to be a successful consultant, this also relates back to the amount of money you can make per day, is that I think you should have a clear profile. Well, at least I've always worked that way. That I work in certain areas, I publish in these areas, I speak on conferences in these areas. So people assume I have experience in these areas, and that's what I can sell, and that's what I work in. Would you agree, or would you say? Being, I don't know, I can't even ask the question. I mean, I can't imagine what a consultant would do, what a consultant's life would be if the consultant would not be focused on a very specific topic area. Do you have any idea how that could, do these people exist? I don't know. Or is that the typical body leaser then, you just go in a project and work?
Maybe it's typical body leasing stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure. I've always tried to follow topics that I'm interested in and where I can spend my heart blood on. Say this is really cool. I should do a lot of OSGI stuff because I really like this kind of modularity, and I would not say I dream all the night about OSGI, but
I'll tell you why.
But it's pretty close to that, and then I just learn a lot about this stuff, and I'm feeling happy to share my experiences about this with other people, and maybe in helping other people to get some OSGI stuff running, for example. But if I would be a consultant for 20 different topics or so, I wouldn't be able to invest all my heart blood into all the different topics and be good at all the different topics.
That's the point.
And I really like to be good at something and then help people or discuss this thing with other people and maybe helping them. So I'm do not really like the situations where, for example, where your boss sends you to a client because the client has asked for an Hibernate expert, and he read on your profile that you've used Hibernate 20 years ago in one of your projects for a week, and now you're a Hibernate expert, and you go to the client and have to consult them Hibernate, and all you can do is try to figure out the night before what the solution could be to be a maybe a tiny little step before the knowledge or before the client. And this is something I don't like, and I avoided all the years back coming into those situations where I'm contracted for something that I don't really be an expert. I don't really know.
Personally, I really have to be confident of what I tell my customers. I have to be sure that I know what I'm talking about, and I have to be sure that what I'm recommending is, it might not be completely what they need. That's a different question, but I have to be confident that things, in principle, that they work and that I've done them before. So I would agree that personally, to be able to do good consulting work, I really have to be very proficient in the particular topic area that I consult about. I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, and I think you also have to be honest. So if they ask you a question for which you don't really have an answer because you haven't done it before, so maybe you have an idea or so,
tell them.
I always tell to say, I have no really idea. I haven't met a team that has this situation before. I can imagine this ABC could help. Maybe we need to try out, but I really don't know the answer. And that's I think that's also important for having a healthy life as a consultant.
Yes, right. Because customers will find out quite quickly if you talk about stuff you really don't know about. They feel it, right? They feel you becoming insecure and just talking blah 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 around things.
Yeah, and typically they're not angry about a situation where you say, "Oh, I have no real idea." Well, maybe if you say this for 3 days in a period,
in your core competency,
in the core competency where you pay a lot of money to your company, and you say 3 days in a row, I have no real idea what your problem is, and I haven't figured out what could help you. But then typically something went wrong before.
Yes. So that's a good point. So how do you find your customers? I mean, how do the customers find you? I mean, how do you ensure that what you just talked about does not happen? How do you match?
Typically, I like to talk to them before. So I'm not talking about these kind of pre-sales and marketing stuff. That's a different thing. Yeah. But if we have found us somehow. I like to talk to them before and try to figure out what the problem is, what the situation is.
Expectation management.
The expectation management. What do they expect from me? I tell them what I think, where I can help them, where I cannot help them. So it's very often the case that I tell those potential clients, I think I have experience in this area and I can help you with that. But I think the other part that you mentioned, I'm not really an expert. I can tell you some stories of my life so, but no real good knowledge. So maybe you should ask for the other stuff, someone else.
Yep.
It's a lot better than sitting there and trying to play a role as an expert A, where you don't really be.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I always try to talk to them in advance, and in many cases you really just need to spend 5 minutes and you get a good understanding of what kind of things they want from you. Sometimes it's a little bit more complicated. I recently was working for a customer where it turned out after the consulting session that they didn't wanted to have any consulting. What they wanted was that I write something that says that what they did is right. And this was completely political. And this was really absolutely awful. And I refused to continue to work with them afterwards because, I mean, this was a joke. But in general, talking to them in advance and getting an understanding of what they need is a good idea. Sometimes I sometimes say, you know, I don't know about these things. Let me bring a colleague, or I recommend you ask this guy. Once a company hired me for the usual DSL consulting stuff in the context of Java and Spring, and I spent a day there, and it turned out they didn't need DSLs. They just needed to use Spring, right? So I said, you know, why don't you call Eberhard Wolf and just hire him, and that's that.
Yeah, I think, and that's same for me, and. Also for the company that I'm involved in, the IT Agile company, I think it's also very important to say, not even you can say, okay, maybe you should not ask me, ask the other guy. Your company should follow the same idea and the same path. Yeah. Saying, we are focused on this and that, and if you would like to get some help for whatever distributed agile teams worldwide.
Ask Jutta
Eckstein, for example.
Yeah, right. So, how do you decide what to charge them? I mean, I don't think I mean, if it probably doesn't make much sense if we say here and now you should charge X thousand or X hundred euros per day, because it obviously depends on the industry, on the country you live in, and so on. But how do you find a price?
I tell them, ask my CEO.
Well, I was an independent. Well, I'm still an independent, but I work with Itemis these days, and so
you couldn't ask your CEO.
Well, I also told them to ask the CTO, which meant that the same telephone was ringing 5 minutes later. And the way I usually do it is that, or I did it at the time, was that I basically had a daily rate that I said, if I get that per day, then that's great. And then if I noticed, you know, it was a company in Switzerland, a bank who has a lot of money, I added 200 or 300 euros to that sum. And if it was a company, you know, a small company, which maybe when they called you and said, yeah, you know, we'd like to have you here, but you know, we can't pay you that much. So if it was an interesting problem, or if it was only 5 kilometers from where I lived, or when I could learn a lot myself, then I reduced this rate as well. But I think it's important for a consultant to have a certain number in your head going into a customer project, because you should know what you want.
Yeah, right? I think it also depends on how long are you involved in the project. So
yes, of course.
Did they buy you for half a year or just for 3 days or so? Yeah. It's very difficult.
I mean, yeah. Right. I mean, it depends on a number of things. One is, of course, also how well known you are regarding the specific topics you're hired to talk about. I mean, if you're well known for something and they hire you for exactly that topic, then you can obviously charge more. I had other projects where for example, I was involved with a BMW in the AUTOSAR proof of concept 2004, and at the time I had some experience with model driven stuff, but I had absolutely no experience with embedded software. So they asked me whether I would like to, actually this was coaching, whether I would like to work with them on this stuff, and I said, yeah, you know, I can help you with this model driven stuff, but I have no experience with embedded, so why don't we agree on a daily rate where I don't earn as much as I would maybe, but I learn about all this embedded stuff while I'm in your project, and I bring in my model-driven stuff, right? And so I worked for a rate that I usually wouldn't have worked for, but it was very good. It took me a year there. I really learned a lot, and that was a good deal. So things like that happen as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the competencies or the skills you need to be a successful consultant. Well, one thing from my perspective, I think we made that clear. You have to be technically fit. You know, you have to really know the topic you want to consult about. I guess that's obvious. right? And in my experience, it's also a good idea to make that known, like talk at conferences, write papers, write articles, so that the world, your potential customer base, gets to know you for these topics, because that makes it easier to match, to find potential customers.
Yeah, it makes it easier for you to find those customers, because maybe they've seen you at the conference, they ask you, they write you an email, so you do not really need to do a lot of these kind of marketing and sales and stuff like that.
Yeah, actually, I never did any sales work as a consultant. I always, and I would say 90% of all projects I worked in, the customer approached me. So they knew what I was standing for, what I worked with, and they approached me and asked me, basically.
Maybe that's very special for you.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I mean, if you look at other people who have a very clear-cut profile, like Peter Rosbach with his Tomcat stuff, or I don't know, Matthias Bohlen or Frank Buschmann, I don't think they call potential customers, can I please work for you? I don't think that's how it works.
Yeah, but maybe exactly those guys and those typical people doing a lot of at conferences and doing this kind of stuff, they come to your mind now, but you don't think about the other guys.
No.
Maybe giving some talks at a conference sometime, and then maybe for 2 years.
What I'm saying is I cannot talk about the other way of finding customers because I never did it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can. Maybe your company, IT Agile, did that more. I don't know.
I think the IT Agile company, we did a lot of these kind of marketing at conferences also.
Right.
Doing talks and writing books, writing articles, and we also create a lot of these kind of marketing toys, or marketing products, like a wallpaper and I don't know.
An iPad you had on one of the...
Yeah, well, that was more an eye catcher. That was not really, but with these kind of Bierdeckel, I don't know the English word for that.
Yeah, and mugs, you have coffee mugs.
Yeah, we have coffee mugs and pens and but all those. I think what's interesting or what's important for those marketing things is that they have a very clear relationship to your profile or your company. So every company has pants. Every company. It simply doesn't matter if you have pants or if you're not pants. So that does not create a relationship with you or your profile or your experiences.
Yes.
It's much more interesting having marketing toys that people quickly associate exactly with your area, with your stuff. And that's what the guys at IT Agile, I think, and it's not me. I'm not inventing all these nice toys at IT Agile. Those are mostly, I think, Henning Wolf and Arne Rook. And they do, I think, a brilliant job creating all these tiny little things that you obviously associate with agile software development, with lightweight tools, and in the end with IT Agile. Yeah.
We were talking about the skills of a consultant. I think when we were at this technical competence as being one ingredient to the skills, I think another one is the ability to, you said it before, to listen. And it's not enough to listen, you have to comprehend. You have to understand the kind of problems the customer has. You have to try to understand also the team dynamics to some extent. So you understand who might be the 2 or 3 key people in the team. So if you transfer your knowledge to those 2 or 3 people, then they can transfer it further. So understanding people, understanding their problems, trying to understand how teams work, that's another very important thing, I think.
Yeah, I think communication skills in general.
Yeah, I would have...
Understanding, listening, and being able to explain something clearly to people.
Yes.
So explain concepts to people,
yes.
Explain ideas to people. It doesn't really is brilliant if you have a great idea in your mind.
You can't communicate it.
You can't communicate it because other people won't listen. And
this is interesting because this also, again, follows into this or fits together with this conference talk and article writing thing, because this is also communication of your knowledge. So in some sense, if a consultant gives good presentations and or writes good papers, that's a good indication that when you hire him, he's able to communicate his knowledge or his ideas to your team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also good to have we already talked about this clear profile.
Yeah.
Where maybe people know you because you're good at DSLs, and I think it is good if those topics if they don't change every half a year.
Yeah.
So this year you're DSL expert, and next year you're the Agile expert, and then the OSGI expert, and then you're the Scala expert, and then the Clojure expert, and then the Tomcat expert, and then the Spring expert, and all the things. Because I think it's interesting for me because I have these two sides, this Agile stuff and these OSGI stuff. And it's, even in this situation, we're really, really interested in both sides. Sometimes people get confused and they ask me for OSGI stuff. They oh really? Oh, you do Agile stuff? Oh, that's interesting. And the other way around. Yeah. And it makes it a lot easier to stay focused on a specific topic for a longer period of time, and do not switch to topic from topic.
Right. Something that I regularly do when customers try to explain something to me is that I listen, I try to understand, and then I reformulate what they just told me in my own words, maybe do a diagram on a flip chart, try to explain things. So this is a very specific technique that I've learned to use. Maybe that's as a recommendation. Not just try to listen passively, but really try to comprehend and then do something with that knowledge by extrapolating or building an example.
Yeah, I think it's even a pretty well-known technique from
I don't
psychology or so.
Absolutely, yeah.
Called active listening or so.
But yeah, right.
I only know the German stuff, but it sounds like active listening.
Yeah, active Zuhören or whatever. Yeah. Yes. No,
All those German words here today.
Yeah. So let's look a little bit. At what the positive and what the negative aspects are of this job. Let's start with the negative aspect, so we can get rid of them. Right. I guess there is one big overwhelming negative point, which is
traveling.
Yeah, traveling.
Yeah,
traveling sucks.
Traveling sucks. I can tell you, even if you have a very important traveling member card of any airline of the world, it's getting a little bit better because you can sit in a quiet room and get some food, but in the end it still sucks.
Traveling sucks.
Still sucks.
So that's something, if you think about becoming a consultant, you have to be willing to travel, and the older you get, the less willing you will become. That's a prediction we can risk making, right?
Yeah, especially if you have a family, and maybe you get children.
Even without.
Even without, yeah.
But the problem is that the interesting projects are usually not where you live, unless you live in I don't know if you live in Seattle or San Francisco.
Oh, yeah.
But if you're like a normal person living in a normal country, in a normal city, then you always have to compromise between interesting projects and projects that are at home. I've been working as a consultant for about 10 years now. And only 2 weeks ago, I was working for a customer where I could actually stay overnight at my parents'.
Yeah.
So it usually customers are somewhere else, and you have to be willing to stay in the hotel and do all this travel crap.
Yeah, and even if it's a great hotel, it's a great airline, even if it can all make things a little bit nicer and a little bit easier and a little bit more family style, but only a little bit. It's not the same.
When I was young, when I was a kid, what I did, I was working at customers basically 100% of the year, and the way I compensated for that was that I took 2 or 3 months off during summertime and basically went flying. So I had something to look forward to.
Yeah.
But I ruined more than one relationship with this. So you really have to. It's a pain, and it might be worth it. I'm still working as a consultant. I don't travel as much anymore for the obvious reasons, but you have to be aware of that.
Yeah, definitely.
Another negative thing? Know about something?
I think another negative thing is that you can't work with a team typically for a longer period of time together with colleagues. So
Right.
even in inside of IT Agile, we have meetings and stuff like that where you meet the other colleagues inside the company. But it's not the same as if you work inside for example, inside a product team,
Yeah.
doing some product development. You see the people every day, and you're familiar with them, and it's more like these kind of the family at work for you. It's not really that feeling. You
I agree.
didn't get this kind of family at work, except if you work for a very long period of time for a project. So I was involved in a project for I think 6 years or so,
Wow.
only part-time, but part-time in the same project.
Right.
And in the end, of course, it felt like being a part of my family.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, the exception.
That's the exception, I would agree. There is another risk related to that, and that is that one thing is that if you don't really work with a team, it might be hard for you to learn. I go to customers, let's again use this refrigerator example. I learn from this company to some extent how to do refrigerators. Now, the point is, I'm not a refrigerator consultant. In the end, I don't care, right?
Mm.
So if you are always the best guy in your specific niche topic area, then it's hard to learn from others in your specific niche area. Certainly you learn all kinds of other things, but they might not be that relevant for your professional advancement. So I think that is a problem. That's why many consultants go to a lot of conferences and also have a big network where they talk to other people, even if they're not in the company, like not the big family, but still a big network of friends and other colleagues to compensate for that to some extent. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like to go to a lot of conferences and talk to all these other guys and all the other people and the other attendees, and really try to use the conference to learn from other people. Not even while listening to talks, but
no.
Listen to other people and talk to other people.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and then finally another risk I think is that you become a talker, right? Somebody who just talks. You have a bunch of polished PowerPoints and you know what to say, but you don't ever really do, right? You just talk. I think that is on the one hand side, it's a risk. You shouldn't become that way. But as a consultant, I sometimes have the feeling it's unavoidable to some extent. I often leave projects after they are like set up in the right direction, and then I don't stay until the end when the real big problems show up, right? Or when you know how it is. The beginning is always easy. So sometimes I feel I would prefer to work in an environment where I actually build something and not just talk about building things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like those projects a lot more where we actually do some stuff. And it doesn't matter if it's technically interesting or if it's a process stuff that's interesting. But staying with the team for a long period of time to see what happens over the time, what problems maybe you have caused with your consultancy after a year or so, because you say them, use architecture X and X sucks a little bit in this and that direction. After a year, after 2 years, I think that's very interesting, and being involved in that after that period of time is beneficial because you learn about your own experiences that you've shared. Yeah. Otherwise, you end in this situation where you generate your knowledge just from talking to other people about your experiences, and then your experiences get less and less and less over time. You're just generating your knowledge from some consulting projects. Never really did it until the end in one of the projects, and that's I'm not so happy with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about the positive aspects of being a consultant. Is there anything?
Is there anything? Sure. I think the obvious thing is you meet a lot of interesting people. Yeah. You meet a lot of teams, a lot of great teams. You can see a lot of different technologies and a lot of different teams, a lot of different projects, different systems, different domains, and that's interesting. It never gets really boring.
Yeah. well,
You have different experiences.
no. The point is, if I agree that the environment is always different. For example, I was recently doing some consulting for a company that builds lithography machines, as part of chip production. And they started the workshop with giving us a 1.5 hour demonstration, and well, I shouldn't say demonstration, tutorial introduction about how these machines work. This was extremely interesting. So just learning about different systems, different environments, different things people do, different cool things people do, is a very, very, very nice aspect of the job. The fact that it never gets boring, I wouldn't agree to that 100%, because I don't know how many Hello World level Xtext DSLs I've built, right?
Yeah.
I probably can't count it. This is boring.
Yeah.
So that's why I always try to make sure that my customers at least, suggest to me a specific domain for which we should build the language, because I really don't want to do my own standard Hello World stuff because it's so boring.
Yeah.
But in general, I agree that's a big plus of the job.
And I think what was also a big plus is that you're not involved inside the typical structures of a company.
You mean like politics,
hierarchies, your boss, and then your career stuff. It's not really connected with your day-to-day work on the client side. Because I visited a lot of even big companies and big hierarchies, and it's sometimes really annoying how those companies sometimes work
or don't work
maybe, and sometimes it's good to say okay, the job is done. You can go back to maybe your consulting company, your small consulting company, or go back to another team where you can work with that team and see it's life can look different.
Yeah. Well, another positive thing can be, you have to be careful to qualify that, working as an independent, if you're willing to travel and if you're willing to work the whole year, you can make a decent amount of money without taking a specific risk, right? It's not like you invest tens of thousands of euros or something, like in a startup, and then you become rich. That's not the same thing. Obviously, with a startup, with a successful startup, you can earn much more than as a consultant, but you can earn a decent amount of money, which is, you probably can earn more than if you're working in a quote normal development organization, I would think. I never did that, but it requires that you really basically sell 100% of your year, meaning 200 days a year, and it also requires that you sell it into small chunks of consulting, because if you work in the same project for a long time, your daily rate obviously goes down. So if you're willing to travel, to have a lot of different customers and to do all that, then you can make a decent amount of money. That's certainly an interesting aspect of the job.
Yeah, especially as freelancer or as an independent consultant, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, as soon as you're kind of, if your salary depends on the amount of money you make.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, of course, if you're an independent as a freelancer, then that's obviously the case.
Yeah.
But also, I would say that if you work for classical consulting companies, then I know that at least in some of them, your salary depends on the amount of money you make for the company.
Mm-hmm.
So there is again this coupling.
Oh, okay.
So that does exist. But the thing is, of course, if you want to do a lot of small consulting jobs, you have to, you have to schedule them, efficiently. You don't have you have to be very flexible when you do your holidays, because usually you have to work when you would like to do holidays. And so I don't do this anymore. That's why, my income has decreased over the last couple of years, because I have not been willing to spend all my time with customers and travel every day. So, well, that's certainly potentially positive.
Yeah.
Anything else positive about our job? For me, really, the biggest benefit is to learn about all these different systems and where people use. How and where people use the technology you quote sell, right? Because if you're focused on a specific topic and you work with different customers on this topic, you can see how these people use, let's say, domain-specific languages. And you learn a lot by observing them.
Yeah.
That's certainly interesting. Okay. I think that's basically what we had prepared, right?
Yeah. Prepared in
in quotes.
in quotes.
Yeah, we intentionally kept this very conversational and didn't prepare it too much because, well, we both have experience working as a consultant and we didn't want to define these clear roles of interviewer and interviewee. So that's why it might have sounded a little bit improvised / chaotic. Well, but we still hope that you liked it. If you have any questions, you know how to reach us. Team at seradio.net or Martin's or my email address directly, and let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Software Engineering Radio. Software Engineering Radio is an educational program brought to you by Hillside Europe. If you want more information about the podcast and all the other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. If you want to support us, you can donate to the SE Radio team via the website, or you can advertise for SE Radio, for example, by clicking on the Dig Reddit Delicious links and the /dot button. To contact the team, please send email to team@se-radio.net, or if it is specific to an episode, please use the comments facility on the website so other people can react to your comments. This episode of SE Radio, as well as all other episodes, are licensed under the Creative Commons 2.5 license. Please see the website for details. Thanks to Charlie Crow and the Podsafe Music Network for the music used in this show. The song is called Vegas Hard Rock Shuffle.